Call the special board meeting to order. Our clock on the wall is a little fast, so we try to go by some time to make sure everybody has a chance to be here. Couple things that we'll discuss after we do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And I would ask Ms. Brown to do the roll call.
Christopher Abel.
Present.
David Bowman.
Here.
Biff Hansen.
Here.
Ann Holson.
Here.
Mary Lofi Blahnik.
Present.
Keith Shaw.
Here.
Carrie Trask.
Present.
Thank you.
Just three things before we get started. With the, I wasn't going to say three things. All the families in the district were emailed the plans today, so they got them at the same time that we are having this meeting. They are welcome to pass them on to neighbors, friends, anybody else who wants to read the presentation if they can't be here. So that went out today. Number two, there's a public meeting in this same room Monday, the 28th. And that is when the presentation will be made to the public group. And it's also a time at the end of that presentation where you could ask questions or make some comments to that presentation at that time. Also, your comments are welcome at the November 5th meeting of the school board. We always do the first meeting of the month as public input. You will also have the opportunity on the 12th of December for public input at that time. So there is none tonight. Tonight is just kind of an informational meeting to let the board know how the committee came up, what the committee came up with. And we'll discuss that after we discuss this year's budget. So I will turn it over at this time to Mr. Milkey.
Thank you. The first piece on the agenda is budget amendments. So we had our budget hearing last week. Next morning, me and all my business manager friends kept hitting refresh on the DPI webpage until the aid certification spreadsheet was ready to go. We were expecting, based on work with Baird, to be down about $200,000 from where our projection was for state aid. So that wasn't that shocking, but the number that came in for vouchers was, we did under project on that. So the projection, we thought we were gonna land at about 5.6 million. Now that's the vouchers and the special ed vouchers together. Last year, it was around 5.1 million. So we projected 5.6 and then it came in just a little bit over $6 million. So we're dealing with $619,952 to cut in the budget. We focused on, we didn't touch any of the special ed dollars that we moved over we made that change based on the data of the kids that we have to serve, so we didn't touch that. We focused on Fund 10, so the general fund, salary and employee benefit expenditures. The vouchers are put into purchase services because we're sending that money out. So that goes out to the private schools that have those students in their schools. So purchase services had to increase, and that was offset with a decrease in salaries. And then we used the state sources on the revenue side of the ledger had to come down. And then we went to employee benefits to lower that down. Everybody's getting paid, everybody's contract is being met, everybody's going to get insurance. We just, we have, less wiggle room. You know, if the administrative team hadn't done some right sizing last spring, it would have been a little more white knuckle, okay? So I submit these, changes to you, these budget amendments to you to balance our budget, just focusing on Fund 10 and not impacting the rest of the budget.
Questions from the board on the changes from last week?
Nothing you can do about it, right?
Just gotta do it, right? Just gotta do it.
No comment.
You want me to go for the next one, Mr. Shaw?
You should.
Okay, all right. Okay, next up, property tax levy. The number that was presented last week is the number we are moving ahead with. So, the levy for our district, you'll see on that second page, broken down by new municipality. Our total levy is 29,606,534. With the changes, in state aid, we're ending up, we're not under levying we're not under levying anymore, just a little over 3 million. Now we're under levying $3.698 million. We are staying true to our word. It's a 3% increase over last year's total levy. And, you know, I submit that to you for your approval so I can start doing the legwork of communicating that out with our municipalities.
I make a motion to amend the budget for the 25-26 school year as presented and to approve the tax levy of $29,606,534 to be approved by the Manitowoc Public School District.
I have a motion. I have a second for Mr. Abel. Any questions?
That's less than we could actually levy.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Understand that.
under levying.
Yes.
3.6
Yep.
million.
3.6, almost 3.7 million.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, and remember, we have the operational referendum, it's at 13 million, then it'll go to 15, then it'll go to 17.5. All parts of a conversation down the line, you know, what we'll do in the coming years, but
To maintain where we're at.
this is where we're at for this year.
And this includes some money on building maintenance, so we're overcoming that we haven't done for years. Okay. Any other questions? All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. And we have a budget.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank Nate for that. I'd also like to thank the people that help you in that office and our Hall of Fame, Mr. Mishler, who still came in and helped us out through the transition to the new person.
Ed Mishler and Mary Blaha really, like, with the team in the business office, put together a good budget. It's my job to keep it inside the rails. You know, they really did a good job of setting us up for success for this year.
So we appreciate your work and also their work and what they did. All right. This time we're going to move into the second part of our meeting tonight. And before I turn it over to Mr. Tennis, the board would like to thank those that served on the committees to look at the building needs in our district. The board felt it was very important to get public input and have public sit in and make decisions on some major changes that we will be going through in the Manitowoc district. So we thank you for being part of that. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Tennis.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. And I'd just like to begin, before I introduce Mr. Hacker to do the presentation. And I know Mr. Hanson just thanked all of you here tonight, but I've lived in this community for nearly a quarter of a century. And it's accepted me as a transplant from the UP, so I appreciate that. But what I will tell you is the reason that I am still here is because of the people that are in this room. They represent the best of our community. We have a community that deeply cares about our school district and the future of our kids. This group came together in the midst of winter last year and spent literally every month together for 90+ minutes, whether they served on the staff committee or the community committee. Stats don't lie. We had just over 30 members of the community show up to our very first meeting. It's always easy to show up to the first meeting of things, right, folks? And we had 28 at our last meeting in August, before we did our September joint meeting. And if that doesn't tell a story of commitment and dedication, they also signed up for this job knowing that the conversations that have to be had here weren't going to be easy. We're facing some realities that need to be addressed, and every single one of these folks here represented tonight truly are what Manitowoc is all about. So I know we thank them, but they deserve a round of applause for them. I don't want to talk about any of their work because that'd be stealing the thunder of the next guy, who will be the man of the hour. We have Mr. Mike Hacker with us from Cadence Consulting. Mr. Hacker serves as our district's owner's rep, which means a lot of different things, but in this particular case, Mr. Hacker took on the opportunity of facilitating both the staff and community groups. So we thank him for his facilitation, and he is acting as spokesperson for the committees tonight in addressing the board. So thank you, Mr. Hacker, and we'll turn it over to you.
Excellent. Well, thank you. It's great to be here. I know I've had a chance to meet a number of you in past conversations, but just as a point of introduction, Mike Hacker with Cadence Consulting, as Lee led with owner's rep by practice. I'm a licensed architect. I've spent my whole career in K-12, so working with Wisconsin school districts. I started Cadence really to help communities solve the problems that are really most worth solving. And to me, if this doesn't define that, I'm not sure what does. And so really a fulfilling process for me, just into why I do what I do and why I've put so much into this effort. And so a lot of pressure on me. I see a lot of eyes behind me, a lot of matching t-shirts behind me that I really represent, as has been noted, lots of hours of work, lots of really, really healthy conversation. Some of that conversation was high fives and agreement. Some was not, right? And we'll talk about that because a lot of what we did get into really does hit home with what defines Manitowoc and what does the future look like. And if we don't have some healthy disagreement on things, I'm not sure we're asking the right questions. And I think this process really was built around doing that. This was challenging how we think of the district, identifying what our real challenges and what are perceived challenges, and then where are the opportunities. And so tonight I look forward to walking you through that. And my goal tonight is to find the right balance of not spending your entire evening recapping 9 months worth of work, yet at the same time not glossing over things. Okay, so I'm going to go through this to the best of my ability, hitting on some really important topics, but I do want to walk you through the process that this committee went through, and then in the end land with their recommendations to the board. Okay, and by all means, wide open to questions. Okay, so if you want me to press into something a little bit more or give you a little more background, please just let me know as we go through the process here. All good? Dive in? Okay. So just to get us going, as Lee had noted as our lead-in, the district put together 2 committees. So we had a committee that was made up of staff of the district and a parallel committee that was made up of community members, all volunteer from both groups. Both teams were brought through the same parallel process. We actually, most months, met with them on subsequent nights. So we would meet on a Wednesday night with one group, and then a Thursday night they did the same exercises, just parallel with one another. It worked out really, really well. As I think in full disclosure, as a facilitator of a process like that, was nervous at the outset that we'd have some conflicting goals and, running 2 different, they really informed one another throughout the process. There was some great dialogue that your staff was closer to, right? Just relative to how the buildings work and how education is delivered. That really did support the community conversation. So it worked really well to have those kind of on back-to-back nights. But we ran those processes parallel. Both groups went through the same exact exercises, and then as was noted, came together at the end for a joint presentation to really review this presentation for tonight and kind of culminate all their efforts together. To kick off the process, we put together a set of committee objectives, which is what you see on the screen here, really acting kind of as our guiding principles for the group. Okay, and in a process like this, I believe firmly needs some guardrails to it to be sure we stay focused and on task, right? There are a lot of rabbit holes, there are a lot of visions for the district that folks come in with, and I think all have the right intention. But as a facilitator of lots of those voices and lots of those perspectives, we do need some ability to be sure we're staying on task and moving the process along. So this did map out the ask of the district to these two committees, really asking them to focus on three primary objectives, really around district enrollment trends, around our physical building in campus, and around our learning environments in the end being the most important thing we do as a public school district. And so there was a lot we had on all of these topics to dive into. So our process really was front-loaded with some capacity building. So first couple meetings, we'll talk more about this, really aimed to lay the groundwork for what should everybody enter this knowing, right? Because everybody's coming in with a different background, a different amount of knowledge in the district. This was meant to create kind of a level starting point for everybody, both from an enrollment standpoint as well as a physical facility standpoint. I think one of the impetus of this process is not just enrollment, but was the facility study that was done that identified quite a bit of fiscal need to support our existing buildings across the district. So that we had to be sure was foundational to the group's work. And then the charge at the end, you can see, really was to develop a long-term vision or visions for the future of the Manitowoc Public School District, really looking at options and considerations for the board targeting this fall, which we're sitting in right now. And so the hope here really was to establish what could become an effort the district worked towards for potentially, but the near future, right? So no district that I've ever worked with does the entire master plan happen all at once, right? It happens incrementally and you phase into it. But if you don't start with that master plan, you don't know how to prioritize those phases. And so really a lot of our effort was focused around how do we ensure we're looking far enough out, yet understand how we can help prioritize some of those recommendations. Okay? So that was the baseline, and we started the process by making sure everybody knew why they were there and what our goals were. As a facilitator, one of my potential blind spots is if we don't have a true cross-section of the community represented in a group like this, right? If we end up being too heavily weighted with parents and not enough non-parents, or vice versa, if we have a lot of staff but not a lot of community members, we end up getting some biases, pretty heavy biases built into our process. And this is a visual profile map, which is what we started our very first meeting out with. And you actually see that behind the team here in real life. And what that really acts as is a survey of the group where every member of the committee was given a string. You start on the left and you make your way to the right, and you start with a question: are you an alum of the district or not? And if you are, in which decade did you graduate? Where in the community do you reside? So if you live within the school district, what pocket? And we used pins for our elementary schools, basically which do you live closest to, just as a reference point. We then had them take a look at our district's strategic planning pillars, okay, and which of those are they entering with kind of the highest priority focus for them as individuals. In a community like Manitowoc, a lot of individuals wear lots of different hats, right? They might be a teacher, a business owner, a parent, they might be an elected official, right? There's lots of different layers you enter conversations like this in. The ask was, which of those do you feel like is the best lens you're approaching this conversation looking through? Okay, just so, again, we have a handle on, what does that look like as a group? And then lastly, if you do have kids in the district, where in fact, which schools do they go to? Okay, and really, I think a great starting point, because it does, I think, show, as you see on the real life version here in the room, just how deeply that web is tied. Okay, so how much overlap, how many crisscrosses we do have, and I think how representative this is of the community. Anywhere you see a string or a set of strings where you see a lot of density, that means we had a lot of voice with that perspective. And spots where you see maybe fewer strings might be a potential blind spot. Okay, and this was something that lived in the room as we had conversations, and it just acted as a reminder to us that as we are going down the path of making recommendations and potentially leading the board towards potential decisions, that this is representative of that cross-section we were hoping to build. I felt very good seeing this once we completed all the string work, just to show that, again, we did have great representation across all schools, across pockets north and south of the river, and certainly all the lenses that we're looking through. Okay, so this lives as a tool for the district. I'm glad we had it here tonight so you could see it in its real perspective. We broke our process really into 4 steps. In February, March, early April, we were really defining the problem. One of my favorite phrases is a problem well put is half solved, right? We all entered into this knowing that we needed to get to a solution. Some people came in with what they assumed a solution might look like or some form of that. But again, if we don't start with a clear understanding of what the problem is, we're really just spinning our wheels, right? And so the whole goal was let's make sure we all have a firm handle on that. So we did a lot of capacity building in those early months around enrollment, not just what the trends have been, what they're projected to be, what's leading to that. I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. What are financial impacts of that, right? Is in Wisconsin, we are enrollment driven on all fronts right now, right? Financially, as we just heard, it's enrollment driven. Our facility usage is enrollment driven, our staffing is enrollment driven, right? So because of that, we have to make enrollment driven decisions, and really wanted the group to understand the layer of how, as we talk about building usage and quantity of classrooms, it's really just being driven by how many students we have in the district. Okay? And then an overview of our facilities. Folks, I think, enter in with either a perspective of when maybe they were in school, what the buildings look like and how they functioned, or when their kids were in the building, and maybe haven't been in them in a while. So we spent some time talking about that, as well as what contemporary learning environments look like. And if we were to compare to a new school being built, how might ours, compare to those? And so we talked about that up front. Then we went through a really exciting process that we called Build Your Own District. And it was this very highly engaging, collaborative, small group work where they developed responses to the challenges. I'm going to present that tonight. We did that over multiple evenings. That was very hands-on. There were some manipulatives on the table where they could push pieces around and develop solutions. And that really was pivotal to getting to a series of options that we honed in on ultimately what we're presenting tonight. So a really important layer in our process. September, October, we refined those into specific statements, which have been formed into the recommendations. And we're here in late October, just maybe ahead of our November target, for a presentation of this committee to the board to start to talk about what that might mean. So in the very first meeting, we did an exercise where we asked in small group tables. Every meeting was really set up with probably a 15-20 minute, I'll say, educational piece, and then there was some engagement. So we did some educating, we did some engaging in each session. And in the very first meeting, the engagement really was around what the understanding of these 3 topic areas are. And they were given a big piece of paper and said, what are the district's strengths? Had 15-20 minutes to document everything that they thought the strengths were. What are our challenges? And as we establish an ideal vision, like what the ideal long-term vision of this district looks like, what does that look like? How would you define some of those things? And this was a really, really telling. And I use this as kind of the outsider coming in. Educate me. Tell me about what these things are so that I know how best to help facilitate this process. And we did that again for both committees, separate from one another. And you saw some things stand out. So strengths, you saw quality staff, strengths of our fine arts, bands, choir, academic college credits, right? Some things that rose to the top. The tally marks you see were how often those came up in different groups. Okay, so again, we had multiple tables for each session, and these are how many times that those came up. So again, ranked essentially by kind of heat map almost, the things that were said most frequently. Challenges, the first thing was our aging facilities, okay, and buildings across the district. A challenge around keeping quality staff and recruiting new staff, our aging community, declining enrollment and student behavior and so on, okay? And then our vision, what would this ideal district look like? Well, the first thing out of the gates was state-of-the-art facilities, okay? We then heard about this becoming or being a destination district, where we really are a pillar of education and performance. A strong, we continue to see strong community support. Okay, so again, just hitting on a couple of them because I think it was a couple key things stood out to me. The fact that one, our staff group and our community group came up with almost identical lists, ranked almost identically to one another. Okay, that was really telling to me, right? A lot of consistency with understanding about who we are and what our honest strengths and where some of our challenges are. Again, fully acknowledging some of these challenges are real, some are perceived challenges that maybe have different levels of reality, and that's what we need to work through as we go forward. But exciting really around the vision. So we saw alignment with staff and community members around a vision, which I think is really telling for the work that was ahead. Okay, so I provide this to you. Feel free when you get some more time to go through this in greater detail. This was not a statistically valid survey, but was pretty representative of that work, and I think is a nice launching point for the work we had.
What month would you say this was completed?
This would have been, I think, in February. Yeah, like early on, February or March, right out of the gates. We did bring them through the process of reviewing the facility audit that was completed by CISA, okay? And I don't need to get into a lot of detail. I know the board has talked about this, community has, spent a lot of time in this. This was also in February, March, there was a fair amount of dialogue relative to the referendum going on, right? So there were some parallel conversations where folks were getting information from multiple sources, but aligned with this. And I think timing was pertinent to our conversation because that is a financial investment that is needed within the district, right? And we need to really look closely at how are we maximizing our facilities and operating them efficiently, recognizing that this kind of wave of investment is coming towards the district. And so I think that was a good foundational piece for folks to get their arms around. So we spent some time on that. We then talked quite a bit on enrollment. And again, I know I led with this a little bit up front, but this was a really important part of our process. I think when we start to think about maximizing the utilization of our buildings, right? The capacity of how many students we're teaching in each of our buildings. As we have fewer and fewer students, the logical understanding probably is that we have some excess space in the district. How much or to what extent? That's really what this effort was attempting to hone in on. And we started out with just some core data. So we looked back about 8 years. Okay, this would have been the 24-25 school year data, right? We were working with. We now have some newer stuff for the current school year, but recognizing this is time stamped from last spring. We represented almost a 600 student drop in the past 8 years. Okay, and as we take that data and look at all the information we do have available, we're seeing the potential of another 900 student drop as we look to the next 10 years. Okay, a lot to be said for that, right? And in every district I'm working with right now, this is very common conversation, and I think we are now starting to see more and more recognition of that statewide. Okay, we're seeing more and more conversations, headlines in newspapers, NPR, pieces on this fiscal challenge districts are having due to declining enrollment. And right now, 70+% of school districts are in fact declining in enrollment. Okay, and so we led with for this group that this is a trend statewide, right? Anytime you see data like this, the initial visceral reaction is, what are we doing wrong? Right? Like, is this us? Is it education? Is it teacher? What is it? Reality is, it really statewide comes down to the fact that we have an aging population in Wisconsin and we have declining birth rates. Those are the two absolute drivers across the state. Are there other factors? Absolutely, right? Do vouchers play a role? They do. They absolutely do. Does open enrollment play a factor? It absolutely does, right? So there are things that the district should talk about and that emerged out of these conversations, which I think was really healthy. We'll talk more about that in the recommendations, but the reality is this isn't just a Manitowoc issue, right? This is a statewide issue. And, as we think about Manitowoc, I think we would all recognize the community as a whole was built for a population much larger. The infrastructure, the roads, the downtown, right? It was built when the community was very different than it is today. Will it come back to that? Will it continue to grow back? Everybody hopes so, right? But the reality is we do need to consider right sizing in order to be best positioned to support that growth. And now's the time. These are the types of conversations that emerge in that effort. Okay, so to the best of our ability, tried to walk the group through this, provided some background. We had a few articles. The state has put out some reports on statewide population decline that's looming and what that might mean. So there's some different pieces we tried to layer in to be sure folks understood kind of the bigger picture layer to this as well. With that, we did get quite granular. It's not small because I don't want to show you the numbers, but a lot of data that we tried to plug in. So we took that enrollment that we have in that last school year and broke it down every way we could to be sure we understood how the district's structured right now. So what you're seeing in this chart as one example is there are 3 tiers to this. At the top, you're seeing our elementary schools. So you see 6 of those. In the middle, you see our 2 middle schools, and at the bottom, you see the high school. You can kind of see the grades on the left. And then we have the enrollment total in each of the grades in each of the buildings. Okay, and what this has allowed us to do is kind of get our arms around how many kids do we have in the district? Where are they across the district? What is our breakdown? Meaning, how balanced are we in elementary schools? What does this look like as feeders to our middle schools? And it helped as kind of a foundational piece to be sure we understood as a district, we are structured as 6 elementaries, 3 and 3. Each of those 3 feed 1 respective middle school, which is 6th through 8th grade, and those feed to 1 high school. Okay, so we're basically a 6 to 2 to 1 as we're structured. You see the totals there. So as an example, Jackson, 339 students, Riverview, 243, and so on. Okay. Broke that down as percentages just so we could kind of get a gut check on, are we fairly balanced across the district there? So of those 1,700 K through 5th graders, you can see 43% of I'll say the Wilson cohort are at Jackson, 30 at Riverview, 26 at Madison, right? It's our way of just trying to breaking down that data the best of our ability. Okay. That then shows us what it looks like at the middle school as 2, 6, 8 buildings, and then ultimately what that looks like when we get to our high school. Okay. So wanted to bring this forth to the group so they had these real numbers in front of them. So as we were pushing forward, they had that data. Though those are a lot of numbers and those are big numbers, and as we push and pull, that gets a lot to get our arms around. So we tried to simplify that a bit down to basically classroom level. How many classrooms do we have? And really focus on our elementaries to start. So kindergarten through 5th grade, if we just think about what we are referencing as sections equal classrooms. Okay, so how many sections do we have across the district? This gives us a quick view of that. So, essentially we have 92 classrooms being taught in across the district, okay, in total. And you can see 16 of those are at Jackson, 13 at Riverview, 11 at Madison. That number ticks up just a little bit on the Washington side, 20, and 12 in Monroe. Okay. But again, just trying to get a baseline. This becomes pertinent here in a minute as we start to talk about our build your own district exercise, but tried to break those total enrollment figures down into how many classrooms we're teaching in, how many teachers we have, and kind of how in some cases we have buildings with 4 sections. Like you see Franklin has multiple 4 section where we have 4 first grade classrooms, 4 second grade classrooms. But in Madison, you know, and at least over in Monroe, we're a two-section building, so half of that, even one in this fourth grade example. So again, just trying to get a sense of where we sit today. We took that data and we had the group do some work around, you know, what do we know, kind of building on the pros and cons of the district. Let's start to map that over this data. So give us some feedback. They had a large sheet that looked like this, Post-it notes, big markers, and they gave a bunch of feedback. And I built that into a summary page, which is what you're starting to see here. Part of that was, again, educate me on the community. And so we got some good feedback around where we think there will be the greatest potential for residential growth in the community, where we have some traffic concerns as folks traverse through the community, where we see the potential for, you know, industrial growth or more manufacturing growth in the community that's to the west. But the biggest thing that stood out, and that's why it's bold and, you know, as clear as I could make it, was how that river creates a north-south component of this community. That, I will tell you, that came out to me in meeting one, and we continued talking about it all the way through last month. Okay, so this is a thing that is kind of baked into the community, that having two equal middle schools, essentially one supporting the north side, one supporting the south, more or less, has created some perceived issues, whether that is related to academic performance or behavior or socioeconomic or racial or whatever those layers are. All of that emerged in this conversation. Okay, and back when I led this thing, we started doing this to bring forth the things that are most worth talking about. This jumped out to me right out of the gate as something that, if we don't land with a solution that doesn't discuss this, I'm not sure we've really addressed one of the biggest things we're hearing. Okay, so we're going to come back to this, but I wanted to be sure we hit on it as a group here, because it was a pretty important layer of a lot of the feedback we got, a lot of the options that we compared, and ultimately a component, not the reason certainly, but a component of the reason that the recommendations in front of you tonight. We then layered that enrollment data on top of our buildings. Okay, and this is where we start talking architecture a little bit. So here we layered in some data on the square footage of our buildings, right? So one of my roles is not to develop solutions on behalf of the group, but to facilitate their process. But do keep a finger on the pulse of, are we on track? Like when we say we're over capacity in buildings or we're under capacity in buildings, are we actually or not, right? Based on the data. And I tried to do that a number of different ways, one of which was this. So as an example, if we were to build a new elementary school today, doesn't matter, you know, anywhere in the state, on average, we would see a new elementary school in 125 to 155 square feet per student. Okay, and that range really is on how I'd say more collaborative environments, more flex spaces, more study rooms, generally lead to larger buildings. So even at 155 square feet per student as kind of the high end of that average, you can see our utilization, square footage per student. I think Jefferson at 184, maybe Franklin at 168 were the closest that even got to the high end of a large new elementary school. Okay, the rest were 200 plus, even up to 350 square feet per student, more than double. So again, that's no judgment passed in that. That's just my gut check. When we're talking, if you were to ask me tonight, do we have excess square footage in our buildings? Just this data alone would tell me, yeah, we do. You know, we likely have an ability through some form of consolidation to find a more efficient way to deliver education to this quantity of students, just objectively looking at that data. Okay. Again, brought this group through this so that they could ask questions. The same exercise at the middle school. Again, we saw some similar data there. We didn't spend as much time layering in the high school piece, not to say that that's not a part of the eventual analysis as how do we respond long-term to this, but really focus on how we're serving the most quantity of students and the most quantity of square footage across the district. We did gut check that against classrooms. Okay, so one other way we looked at this was quantity of available classrooms across the district. Okay, I will say kind of in full disclosure, this was an analysis I did objectively, not layering in. We did not meet with every principal. We did not tour every building to identify exactly how we're using every space. My goal was to simply say, was this room designed with the intent to be a traditional classroom or not? Not, is that how we're using it today, right? Because in schools, we find great ways to use every square foot we have, right? So I guarantee, even though I say we have excess square footage or excess classrooms in our buildings, we're probably using them right now in an important way. Not to disparage any of that, just simply to say, how many classrooms were designed district-wide and how many are we utilizing? Okay, and this was, again, just another gut check, but it did suggest that we have about 210 classrooms across the district, and today we're teaching out 133 of those across these elementary, including Stangl. That's an anomaly in that we're not using Stangl the same way, right? But our classrooms there that are teachable, and our middle school. So again, me just trying to bring forth kind of objective criteria to say, okay, if the group starts leaning towards solutions that suggest consolidation in the end, would the data support that? And another touch point suggested it certainly does. Okay, we then talked about contemporary learning environments. So we spent one evening talking about kind of an overview of who the district is right now relative to our learning spaces. So we have a series of photos from classrooms across the district. What do our classrooms look like? And then I did a presentation on what contemporary classrooms look like. Okay, so let's look at all the Wisconsin recently completed elementary, middle schools. What do they look like? What are the space types? What are we talking with teachers about in terms of pedagogy and curriculum delivery, and how does the architecture respond to that? And that's what you see in this graphic. And so we each small group had a large sheet of paper with all these images on it that really represented contemporary learning environments. And the group were given, each individual was given blue dots and white dots. The blue dots represented things we really liked. The white dots maybe things we didn't like as much. And the session was really built around them having really engaged dialogue. A lot of really good conversation about the things we saw that were very positive. So you see some images here where you see, like in the very top left, an image that has only blue dots in it, right? That really stands out. That there's something about that, and there's a lot of positives that the group collectively, unanimously saw in that. We also saw some images like bottom left, maybe the second one in, where you see only white dots, right? And again, things in that image that the group felt maybe less comfortable with. And so those are really good conversations to have, kind of get some handle on what are the collection of images that we think best represent. Back to that first meeting when we said our most important vision for the future is state-of-the-art facilities. The blue dots should represent what this group envisions as that. Okay? As a facilitator, I really like the images where we have blue and white dots. I know that is friction, right? But that's a good thing, right? Because there's something that we like and something we don't, and those are the conversations we should have. So this was, I think, a really positive conversation, again, to kind of widen the aperture around as we talk about contemporary learning environments. It may not just be like repainting the rooms we have, but it may mean we need to continue to talk about what the district looks like, maybe closer to the blue dots on this image.
So it was things like flexible learning spaces,
Yep.
or like, can you share generalizations?
Yeah. So we talked a lot about kind of fluid learning, right? So meaning, if we start to break down what we define as just the four walls of a classroom, so learning that's spilling out into corridors. So what we used to think about as just a hallway with cubbies or lockers now is learning space, right? So a lot of like that top left image is essentially I know it's small in your graphic, but it is a collaborative learning environment that's basically surrounded by a pod. This is like in a middle school house. You can imagine a house with 4 or 5 classrooms around it with this shared resource space in the center where students go out and do group work. We can do some special ed pull-out intervention work. We can give some students with the ability to step out and do some independent work, some space to do that. A lot of transparency, right? A lot of flexibility to allow for, in that case, walls to open up and classrooms to literally spill out into those spaces. We talked about team, right? Things like that. So I think really good dialogues. I would say where a lot of maybe the moments of friction in moments like that did come into where we talk about security and safety. You know, we talk about flexibility and glass and transparency. It runs counterintuitive to what a safe school might look like, might think it looks like. But a safe school, what we think it might look like, doesn't look like contemporary learning spaces, right? Back to kind of cells and bells, old kind of classrooms without a lot of natural light and, right, very different. So there is some really healthy conversation around what that might mean for the district. And that, I will tell you, is something every district grapples with as they design new space. But yeah, I think most importantly, some really healthy conversation at those table levels around what folks saw and yeah.
Mike, I apologize for backtracking here. On slide number page 13, build your own district, I see where you use Stangl in your comparisons here, 0 classrooms, but 18 available. Do you have the square footage of Stangl? I didn't see that. How does that measure into the district size?
Yep, I can layer that in.
Oh,
Yep,
okay.
yeah, I can layer that in separately. We tried to break down the district, how we're using it in square footage, so we understood building by building.
But if we're looking at the future,
Yep.
where does Stangl fit into this?
You got it.
Okay.
Yep, yeah, it's not lost on the conversation.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so let's continue into build your own district. So this is where I think excitedly the rubber really met the road from like a hands-on engagement level. So how this was structured was that we were going to go through a process of developing options. This is, you know, anytime I've worked with a community around a process like this, ultimately we have to develop options. We have to develop solutions to this challenge. How you go about that is the question, right? How do we do that in a way that folks are engaged, that they have buy-in, that they understand the why behind the moves they made? There's a lot of complexity to this many schools and this many classrooms. And so what we tried to do was develop a process that it kind of instilled some ownership of the folks in the room here around how we went through this process, how we landed on scenarios. And so what you see on the screen here is essentially I'll say like a map of the community that was printed large and sat on a table. This represents all of the schools that we were focused on. So all of our elementaries and our middle schools. Each of those schools generally are located with a pin near their geography in the community, right? So we can understand kind of generally where they sit. We had some core data on there around square footage of the building, available classrooms in that building. So we knew kind of the context of that building. And then folks were given each table was given a stack of 11 by 17s. And those 11 by 17s were essentially their means of documenting options, okay? And so what we did was created an exercise where each classroom was a cube, a physical cube. And I know I was fortunate to come in and talk with, I think, the Facility and Finance Committee early on in the process, and I introduced a little bit of this to the group. These cubes essentially are like 1 inch by 1 inch blocks. Each one represents a classroom. They have a label on them, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, right, for each of our grades. And when the committee entered in, we had a series of small group tables set up, right, so 4 or 5 people per table. And as you see on the screen, the blocks were set up with our current classroom breakdown across the district as it sits today. Okay, so really the exercise was, as we sit down and look at the table, this is who we are today. This is how many first grades we have in this building, how many second grades we have in this building as a starting point to the dialogue. Okay, and over 3 sessions, really, the group was asked to start to move these blocks around. Okay, and by design, I will say that there is tension around dialogue around closing schools. Acknowledge that, right? First and foremost, in every district there is, and for good reason. I designed this such that the first move, meaning when the group sat down, they had to move blocks away from a building, right? So there was a moment of tension in their very first move around what that meant. So I think by design, it was meant to elevate kind of the severity, the significance of the conversation we're having. And I think we felt that. There was a lot of really healthy conversation about what that means, what it means for neighborhoods, what it might mean for North-South. And so I just want to acknowledge that to the board because I think that was a really important part of this process. Okay, and so essentially these blocks just start moving around. And as soon as they pause, they document that as an option. Okay, so meaning what if we close 1 school and shift these around? What if we close 2 schools? What might that look like? What does North-South look like? How do we create targets. So we did give them some goals. We said, okay, if we're gonna be a balanced district, what that means is we have all of our elementaries the same size. That may never be perfect science, right? But our goal should be that we have a similar quantity of sections, number of students, balances teachers. Lee brought some great data to the group about running efficient schools from like a total student standpoint, from a staffing perspective, right? So we don't have fewer itinerant staff running around the district because we're able to commit them to schools of certain sizes. So again, tried to give them some framework in which to work around, okay? Ask them to start with reorganizing this to match the district grade configuration that we are today, meaning keep K5, 6, 8, right? So first start by fewer moving parts. So just stay within where we are, just maybe different quantities of schools and different arrangements. And then once we felt like we exhausted that, we said, okay, what if we change grade configuration, right? What if we start to rethink where certain grades are in the district? Really facilitate some great discussion at both ends, right? What does a transition look like? What's the right age to make a transition from one building to another? You know, what does early learning look and feel like in the district? And I know that's got some history in Manitowoc as we've approached it differently. And so some really good discussion around each of those things. And just a couple photos. You see some familiar faces in the room tonight to the photos here. And so again, just trying to display how hands-on this was, literally moving these blocks around, good discussions. There was a cube that said close, idle, sell building, right? So you had to place that on top of the building to kind of finalize the option. And so again, those are meant to be moments where we recognize what that means as a part of that as an option. Okay. So really, really robust dialogues, lots of work on my end behind the scenes to take all these options that were developed and compare them. As you might imagine, a lot of overlap. So we had, 5 or 6 tables set up in one session, 3 or 4 tables set up in the other session. They were doing the same work, coming up with similar options that differed slightly, but a lot of overlap between them. It was my job to kind of encapsulate that process in a way that could reflect all the work that was done. What that resulted in was 54 unique options, right? So again, the goal at the outset of this was to really make sure this group, if we're ever challenged with, did we think of this or why didn't we consider that? The goal was to have exhausted as many viable options as possible. And as you can see, 54 different versions of that were developed across these groups. And again, if I can, give props to the folks in the room and those that aren't, that were a part of this work. That's a lot of work, a lot of great discussion. Every one of these options had a significant amount of dialogue to develop it as something worth us talking more about. So really does, I think, reflect a commitment the board has made to allowing the community to really be a robust part of this process, but props to the community on really exhausting all the different strategies and approaches to tackle this challenge. When we talk about district structure, again, I led with, we have 6 elementaries, really 3 and 3, leading to 2 middles and 1 high, K5, 6, 8, 9, 12. We came up with 14 distinct different district structures, 10 different grade configurations, and then in the end, tried our best to kind of encompass those into these 3 buckets of how do we understand them based on the district structure, the grade configuration, and overall enrollment size of a given school. Okay, there's a point at which if you were to say, max out capacity in a building, get as small as possible, what it ends up meaning is we just get really large schools, right? Even if we had the capacity in that building, we may not want to teach to that capacity. It may be too large as an elementary or a middle school. What does that mean? So we had a lot of good discussions about what that might feel like, okay? So the goal was not to say, here are 54 options, okay, committee, which is your favorite, right? That would just be a spiral, right, to the end. It was how can we take and break this down in a way that we could start to digest it, create some priorities, and work our way through that. And so how we did that was organizing, as I said, into these 3 primary buckets. The first is the grade configuration. So what you're seeing on the screen, just to kind of point this out, we identified that, we had this K5, 6, 8, 9, 12, which is essentially who we are today. We had a configuration as K4, 5, 8, 9, 12. We had K4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12. And you can see us kind of marching our way down the line of all the different grade configurations that were developed. With this comes a couple other layers. One is, educationally, what does this mean? Like, how do we deliver curriculum K4 versus K5? Excuse me, kindergarten through fifth grade versus kindergarten through fourth grade. What would a 2-4 building feel like different from a 2-3 building, right? A lot of different layers to that. So we did bring in your curriculum team to be a part of some of those conversations, just so as we had some questions about what that looked like. They were able to layer in some of that feedback. So we did bring some of that expertise to that conversation. We also talked a lot about transitions. Okay, so a transition would be essentially when you go from one school to another school. Okay, so today our transition is 5th to 6th grade, where essentially we triple our cohort, right? So in 5th grade, we know 2 or 3 sections of friends, right? If that makes sense. Maybe we have 60 peers. When we step to our middle school, that triples. Right? So we now bring 3 schools worth of peers into one location. And then when we go to high school, it doubles again, right? So we think about transitions and what does that mean to the student? Okay, meaning socially, emotionally, what does that look like? What does a transition look like educationally, right? There's data out there on transitional impact at certain ages and what that feels like. Also, how long you're in a building. Okay, so we had options where, we had this rolling cohort notion of kindergarten is in a building, first grade's in a building, second grade's in a building. A lot of dialogues around, boy, that's, 9 transitions through the district. That's maybe not practical or possible. It means we're in a building 1 year, meaning we get that principal gets to know that student for 1 year and we transition everything about that student to a new principal. Really healthy for the group to talk about what would that look like as a district, but pretty quickly ruled out for a lot of, I think, practical reasons. But again, this was our approach to start to hone in these options down to what we thought was most practical for, an ideal district as we go forward. We did the same thing for enrollment size. So at the bottom, that's basically this sliding scale showing an elementary school from 0 students up to 1,000 students. The circles represent your enrollment today in your elementary schools. So you kind of get a quick visual of how big your enrollment are in your elementaries today. And then those vertical tick marks are all the options that the groups developed. Okay, so when they push those blocks around and they push pause, each of those blocks represents a total number of students. So it's pretty easy for us to estimate how many students would be in a given building in that option. So you can see we had basically increments of 20 when we have 54 options, right? We have lots of different scales there. But what this allowed us to do is talk about how big is too big, right? We had options that had schools just over 200. We had options that had schools upwards of over 900 students. So really, again, facilitated a good discussion around like what is the sweet spot for Manitowoc, and that differs, right? We have some districts that have 600-700 students in elementary, and they're high performing, and that's what the community represents the community. They're comfortable with that. We have other districts that are building new schools. I would say never more than 400, 500 students in it. So every district is different, I will say, and this did facilitate some good discussion around what that looks like. And then lastly, what does the district structure look like? And I think this is where we start to tiptoe down that north-south divide path, right? As we think about this river and really having 2 equal middle schools mean we have to set boundaries for our middles. And when we do that, we have to set boundaries for our elementaries that support finding some balance within that. And with that over time, we have this north-south, whether that's, there are components of that that are real and true and actual, or perception woven in. It's probably a balance of both of those things, but a lot of that emerged as we really started to have these dialogues. Okay, and these again, every one of these options you see on the screen is a diagram of an option that was developed by the committee. Okay, so we see in the top left as an example who you are today. Okay, so one elementary smaller version of who you are today. So in this top left example here, you're seeing instead of 6 elementaries, you're seeing 5. So this was an option that closed 1 and then kept 2 middle schools. And we just figure out how to set up the boundaries to basically run the same district with just a little smaller elementary footprint. Okay. We did the same thing here with 4 elementaries. So same exercise, just closing 2 in this example, so 4 to 2 to 1. We got down to 3 to 2 to 1, right? As you might imagine, we're solving for the same number of students, whether it's 5, 4, or 3. So as we get to 3 elementary schools, they start to become the larger enrollment, back to that last chart where we had enrollment size, right? So the fewer schools, the more students we have in them, right? So that was a big part of the balance as the group went through this process. We then had really good dialogues about just having a single move to 1 middle school, okay? Whether that's, again, 5, 4, or 3 elementary serving 1 middle school. We talked about, which will emerge further here, an intermediate and middle school component, which becomes an important part of our conversation as we go forward. But again, really, I think as we got into this, started to hone in on 2 key things that stood out. I think one, we kind of had 2 discussions going. One is how big does the district need or want to be as an elementary solution? And what does a middle school solution look like? They're interconnected, but they're kind of 2 separate conversations, right? Because as you can see, we have options of being 6, 5, 4, 3, and in theory, the square footage could support that. So really, it's a discussion of how many elementaries is the right quantity of elementaries, and then a separate dialogue about what is the best path to serve our middle school students, and what does that grade configuration look like. And we had some really healthy conversations about those 2 things parallel to one another. Okay, so out of that, the groups were given essentially a survey, if you will, to kind of take these, circle things you like, cross things out you don't like. They were individually were given pages to do the same thing, so they could give me individual feedback if they weren't comfortable as a group. And my job was to start to help hone the group in. And I acknowledged right out of the gates in this is the point at which we start to, as a group, become a little vulnerable, because now we're starting to try to build consensus. Okay, I will say this is kind of where my job gets hard, in that, you know, if the expectation is we have a unanimous support for every component of this, I would never get to an end product anywhere, right? I think that's just a reality. Lots of perspective, lots of really good feedback, and my goal was to build consensus around the things that seem to rise to the top most frequently or the most vocally, and find a way to message that to, on behalf of this group, to the board, okay? And so this process, again, large pages, a lot of circles and highlights and Xing things out, emerged into what really started to look like a heat map, okay? And a couple things you're seeing a little bit small on here, but I put some numbers at the top of these that kind of represented the options that folks said we like or we don't like, meaning keep this or cross this thing off, don't consider it anymore. Where you're seeing some of the blue are where it became pretty clear, where we had almost exclusive likes and no dislikes, right? So I have to identify where are those things, because those are the things that emerge as where we might be able to build around some consensus, okay? And so you're seeing, you know, we had a lot of good feedback around each of these options, but really one of them stood out pretty consistently as a key preferred grade configuration. Okay, and I'll talk more, I'll break this out in a second, but just to show you, that's how we honed in on that. Same thing for enrollment size. Each of these kind of overlapping boxes represents a range that the group gave, so you can start to see where that overlap in density is, kind of suggested kind of this 400 to 500 range is where we saw kind of a sweet spot for a lot of overlap. And out of that emerged, I think, this, which is the basis of what you'll see as formal recommendations here in a minute. So what you're seeing here is on the left, the option or, you know, the kind of summary images that support, I think, the ultimate recommendations that we'll talk about tonight. So on the left, you're seeing a district structure that looks like 4 elementary schools, okay, ideally balanced in size to the best of the district's ability. You can see those are identified as K4 elementary schools. We'll talk grade configuration in a second here. You see that listed on the diagram on the left. You're seeing an IS would be referencing an intermediate school, a middle school, and a high school. Okay, so really important here, because this is where emerging out of all of those good conversations came, you know, a lot of value in really looking at 5th through eighth grade as this kind of target window for how we're thinking of middle schoolers, right? So there's a high level of comfort with considering taking fifth out of our elementaries, thinking of that as a middle school grade, okay? Focused on then how do we solve for kindergarten through fourth grade and do that efficiently? And you see 4 buildings at 350-ish students as kind of the target as where the group was really comfortable, okay? That then led us into what would ideal fifth through eighth grade look like? Is that 2 equal fifth through eighth grade buildings? Meaning basically move fifth grade into the buildings we have. That keeps our north-south divide. A lot of good dialogue emerged around what could we do to eliminate that? And what emerged here is a recommendation to consider a fifth through sixth grade solution and a seventh and eighth grade solution. Okay, so what we're terming an intermediate and a middle school as 2 separate paths. We've had in support of that group and since some really good dialogue with the district's curriculum team around what might that mean for fifth grade, the biggest, has the biggest change out of all of this, and how might they fit into a sixth grade, more middle school model? What does a 5-6 building look like from a teacher collaborative standpoint? What does teacher licensing look like? And so we've had some really good discussions around that I think have been really healthy and very positive in support of this direction, okay? So I'm gonna come back to what that means in terms of building level solution in a minute, but wanted to just introduce that as without assigning where does fifth and sixth grade live or seventh and eighth grade live, because a lot of discussion is that in one building but in 2 wings, is it in 2 separate buildings? That TBD, we'll talk more about that in a minute, but I think the important move there was essentially no longer does the district have 2 equal middle schools with 2 separate boundaries. We now have, in theory, 4 elementary schools with 4 elementary boundaries, and we dialogue about what is the right makeup of those separately. But after that, we're all ships, okay? And that's, I think, a really important transition, right? Really, we see it on shirts all over the place, right? That was an important layer into how we're really starting to think about, building on Lincoln, right? So much of what I kept hearing about was, even tonight, you leave here tonight, you go to Culver's, you're gonna see 30 little kids with ice cream, all with ship hats on, right? Their baseball hats on. Like, everybody's a ship. You don't feel that when you talk about it at the middle school level. As an outsider coming in, that shouldn't be the case, right? Is this an opportunity to maybe best respond to that and improve some of those things that have been embedded potentially in the community for years? Okay, so not to belabor that, but I think it's important just to note the importance of that in what you see in front of you here. So in the grade configuration diagram, you're simply seeing today we're K5, 6, 8, 9, 12, and essentially that's pulling fifth grade out, and then we now have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12. We do go from 2 transitions to 3 transitions. Okay, so that was a key part of the dialogue, but a lot of the conversation was really, is a fifth grader ready for a 5-6 model? So I think you have some experts in district that can really support that conversation further and what that would look like. And is 6th to 7th grade, what does that transition look like? Are we really culturally building a leadership team that's thinking 5th through 8th, whether in 1 building or 2 buildings, right? We can start to break that down differently than trying to create 2 equal buildings.
Is there a population cap on the intermediate level and the middle school level, 5, 6, 7, 8? Looks like 360 for our elementaries, but is there a limit or what we would project those 2 buildings populations to be at?
Yeah, so
What population would they be looking at?
yeah, so essentially, if you think about I'm gonna just step back to our data. If we were using just the same numbers, let me see if I get back to here. So right now, as an example, 5th grade across the district is 313 students. 6th grade is 360 students. So you can assume 700-ish students for each of those 2 buildings. Okay. Again, today they have 480 to 560. Okay. So potentially more, but because of, again, you can see when we look at the square footage analysis, we have, in theory, the space in the buildings to support that. Okay. I think let me circle back to, we're gonna talk recommendations in a minute. Okay, 'cause I think it'll tie more directly to how we respond to that at the building level. So let me just pause there for a moment, take a deep breath, as a group before we talk recommendations. Are there any other questions from certainly Lee, Nathan, others? I mean, at the admin level, feel free to add on.
I'm just wondering about, and I was a little worried about size, but the elementary size. I had two concerns on, is there any, and maybe Heidi may know this or Katie could get this, but any data or studies on transitions for kids and what they go through and you know, former special ed teacher, I know sometimes that's more difficult for kids and I was just wondering about that. And then my other question would be the transportation issue. I don't have a problem with north-south, but that would also take those middle schools out of that. Not that they're neighborhood because, but that would be another thing that I'm just wondering if the transition thing I'm worried about with kids.
Yeah, I'll definitely defer if, I don't know if you have any feedback on transitions right now.
No, that would just be general knowledge, like I don't have any research.
Yeah,
I can share some things that I've learned. So the intermediate schools in the state are a thing. A couple that are near us would be Kimberly and De Pere. I had a conversation on Monday night with Holly, who's the superintendent in Kimberly, and we talked about this structure that they use. They've had this structure in for a very long time. She talked about the pros and cons. She did say that, I asked her, would you keep the structure? She said, yes, educationally, it's really good, for instruction and for getting those fifth graders, you know, a little bit more of a move up. She talked a little bit about the need for good systems and transitional programming when you're moving kids. She talked about that they've had to develop systems in which they're communicating between those buildings as they go, so that the relationships you develop in a K-5 setting are going to be stronger naturally because you have longer time. But what she said that they do is they really have systems in which they communicate between the two buildings when the students transition. We've also internally had conversations knowing that transitions are very important to build extra time within our calendar, really for all of our students, whether they're transitioning into you know, a new grade structure, but also thinking about the kids who may be changing school buildings and how that is also a transition. So how can we use our school calendar to ensure that we're putting time and effort into good transitional programs for kids so that they can make those seamless transitions into learning in their new schools and or their new grade configurations.
Yeah, and not to fast forward ahead of the recommendations in a minute, but we're showing 5, 6, 7, 8 as 2 steps. Quite a bit of dialogue about, boy, would it not be ideal if they were under one roof? If we could set up an efficient building where we had a wing that was 6, 8, that had a bell schedule, 5, 6 to support 5, 6 learning, right? And the hours they need in certain grades, and allow 7, 8 to be there separate, but maybe we share a cafeteria so we can, you know, adjust, you know, and have some efficiency built in, or, you know, share a tech ed wing, so we don't have 2 of those in the district or something. So some really healthy conversation where you start to blur that line of, if they're under one roof, does that feel different? Right? That transitions from one wing to another, does that feel different from across town, right? As we might think of 2 existing buildings today. So I think important to maybe lay that as a part of the discussion. Again, this group was charged with creating a long-term vision. I think we've had some really good conversations about what that looks like, but this group was not charged to develop an architectural solution to that and provide that to you. So that's, we wanted to, I will say, there were a lot of conversations around how quickly can we get to that point, but it's not my job to fast forward to that. We got to start incrementally with this. So I think that's a really important question, but it may be stunted a little just in that, you know, the dialogue may want to continue to be around creating a 5-8 culture, whether it's in 2 buildings in the community or under one roof. Ideally, it's successful no matter which of those 2 were structured under.
And then too, just to touch on your transportation question, when this was all getting fleshed out, we did sit down with Brant to talk about, the first question is this feasible, right? So the answer was yes, and then the next question is, okay, knowing these are the recommendations, can we start to look at like estimates of things? And so that's all in the works. It's not ready at this point, but it's in the works and it will be part of further information as we move through this process.
Thank you.
May I ask how much discussion went on as you got close to this, the recommendations for build your own district for future proofing? Because as you yourself point out, we're looking at a 100 to 125 student decline annually. And that means these I assume are the projections at what we see peak, which means those numbers will drop.
100%. And there's two ways to look at that, right? One is, optimistically, I don't want to say pessimistically, realistically, or optimistic.
I know what you're trying to say. I got you.
I think the optimistic view is that jobs are coming, and you hear the mayor and city folks talk about new developments coming and more housing and all
And building new schools.
positive things, right? And ideally that is the case, and ideally those bring more families, and if we're in that position, it's a very different conversation. That likely is offsetting the decline we're projecting to continue to experience based on our birth rates and our aging population. Manitowoc County does have an older population in comparison to a lot of others around, so it does align with that. But you're not wrong, and that's, I think, what I didn't point out here on the bottom of this image are those three buildings in gray. Okay, those are, again, if we look at the cross-section of the district's like architectural portfolio, like all the buildings you have your teaching out of, you include Riverview and Stangl and everything in that. In this model, there are 3 idle schools. Okay, and I say idle meaning what the district would have a decision. What do you do with those buildings? And again, that's a part of the guardrails in this conversation. We wanted the group that was participating to give some feeling on those things. Maybe layer that into some of their recommendations on what you keep open and what you close based on reuse of a property or something like that. But that wasn't the goal. Like we didn't charge the group with coming up with an ideal, like which building is worth the most to sell, right, as an example, or something. That wasn't the charge. But what this does do is position the district to really look closely at those 3 buildings. Like what, in a scenario where we know we have some other layers, right, the district should be thinking about the short term, operating as efficiently as possible, but also what happens if we do? What if we pivot and we see some spikes in enrollment and we see some positive shifts, then like the sky falls and the state provides more money for, all of a sudden we're in a different position, right? Then, we should be dialoguing. We go, what of those 3 should we hold on to and what maybe shouldn't we in the long term? We need to consider how much investment is needed in those 3 buildings, right? That goes back to that CESA study, because that would be a deferred needed investment, right? Multiple millions of dollars in each of those 3 buildings. We have to, if we keep them, do something with them, we need to invest in them. That is a part of the layer here is how much do we keep in hopes that we do rebound and aren't just like building new schools when we had them, right? We want to avoid that. The community certainly would probably respond well to that. I will say this really was focused on the majority of students. I want to point that out. We did talk a lot about making sure we're mindful of our special ed population, our alternative high school components, some of our virtual pieces, some of the ancillary that aren't the majority, that we're not lost on this. And that's a part of, I think, what comes in a recommendation from the admin team, right? Not that our community isn't positioned well to give some feedback on that, but those are really specialty areas that I think your administrative team would probably have a really strong handle on what's the best solution for, the alternative high school piece or what does, 4K look like as a district long-term. That's really, I think, an admin-led thing, which those gray boxes on the bottom there, I think, become a key part of that dialogue. Like, how are we supporting that? The other layer, I'll point out, when a more formal recommendation on which buildings, again, this committee was not charged with putting names on these buildings. You're seeing that, right? That's not me like ducking behind the fact that we're not putting.
Nor would they want
No, I know. It's not lost on me. The group was really charged with coming up with ideal visions for the district. And to me, that's an admin and board level discussion around how best to respond to that. As a part of that, I think the board should expect to see what would the capacity of a building be versus what we're projecting would go into that. If we have bubbles move through, can we absorb that in the building comfortably? And I think that would come as a part of a sound recommendation if that were a next step. Sure. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You know, when this first came up, it was almost exclusively a financial, this is, you know, boards gone by. It was almost exclusively a financial situation. The assumption was is if we closed down schools and if we reduced staff, there would be just assumed to be a lower tax levy. That the system would be cheaper to run, et cetera, et cetera. Is that at all a challengeable assumption?
Yeah, in the districts I'm working with, so it's not, I'm fortunate to work with a number of districts. It's not always a fortunate conversation, right, in those districts as we talk about these challenges. That's always the rub, right? And the reality is most districts are in a position where they just need to like be black on the bottom line.
Yeah.
We need to find a way to be fiscally solvent. Otherwise, we just perpetually would be in operational referendum mode forever. Right? And could we do that? Could we stay exactly how we are today and just keep asking the community for more operational revenue to run the buildings we're in? Of course, right? But is that sound fiscal strategy? Would you run a private business that way? No, I think most, especially in a kind of conservative state, fiscally conservative state, which Wisconsin very much is, I think the expectation is the board is challenging itself in looking at how are we operating our facilities. And to me, this is how you do that, which is, you know, what is a healthy size district, being mindful of long-term, which I think is a great question, but doing so in operating as efficiently as practical in a way that still allows us to deliver education at the highest level, right? Which, you know, like I've said, there are ways that we could have fewer elementary schools than what's here, right?
Sure.
But that means larger school sizes, more kids to manage in a building, more buses and parents showing up at that building every morning and afternoon. And this to me feels like one of the merits and successes of this is finding a balance amidst all those layers. So let me walk you through this piece because we're having some good discussion, which I think ties into this. So this one pager, which I'll enlarge here in a second, encompasses the recommendations to the board from the committee. Okay, and they're really broken into three parts. One is kind of a high level, kind of macro view of recommendations. Then we got specific at the elementary and at the middle level to give some specificity to that. Okay, so just starting out with a statement that kind of defines our existing conditions. And I'm just going to read these so folks that are watching or listening that may not be able to see the screen can hear them. The Manitowoc Public School District has experienced declining student enrollment and is projected to continue experiencing it. This has led to operational and educational inefficiencies and an excess of building space across the district. Okay, that is kind of a macro paragraph kind of summarizing everything we led with, the why we're here. The Manitowoc Public School District's buildings are aging and facing failing infrastructure and outdated learning environments. Again, supported by the CISA study and contemporary discussions we talked about, as well as I think real time we're experiencing managing. So the committee's recommendations, we'll start with kind of the macro level. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these statements. So the first one is consider comprehensive strategies to stabilize and grow the student enrollment. Okay. So regardless of how many buildings we're in, regardless of where they're located in the community or what the grade configuration looks like, the recommendation to the board and to the admin is to let's figure out the root cause of this, which is our declining enrollment. What levers do we have? What strategies, what discussions should be had to position the district to either right that ship, balance that out, or look for strategies to increase that enrollment, okay? Again, if it were completely up to the district, we probably have already made those decisions by now, right? The reality is The root cause of that decline isn't the fault of the district. But if there are things the district can do, we should be having dialogues about what we should be doing to strategize about that, okay? The second one is consider adjustments to district structure to create equitable educational experiences for every student, okay? And that emerged out of, I think, recognizing that not every student goes to a school of the same size, right? So we saw some schools with 1 or 2 sections at any grade level versus schools that have 3 or 4. That's a very different experience for that student. It's a very different experience both socially and emotionally, as well as if you like have special needs. It's more difficult to have our specialists in buildings where we have 1 or 2 sections in them all day long, right? So if that student has a need, it's gonna be different. The expectation should be different, that aid is there, different than if we had a building with 3 or 4 sections where that aid is in that building all day long and likely is available if that student needs that support. So things like that, we just don't have that balance across the district. That was just one example, but no different than a lot of other strategies. So whatever we do coming out of this, the recommendation is to do our best to create an equitable experience for every student. Okay, I think an admirable goal to shoot for. Consider the operational and educational benefits of shifting grade configurations within the district. Okay, we started to talk about that, but we'll talk more about what that means. Consider school building consolidation to maximize operational and educational efficiencies while optimizing resources for student success and well-being. And then lastly, consider physical capital improvements to all educational spaces. We put in interior and exterior, district-wide to align with current district curriculum delivery, as well as contemporary learning environments, architectural design, and best practices. Okay, so again, when we are talking about improvements, whether that's replacing carpet or painting walls or replacing roofs, at any of those moments in our existing schools, we should ideally be running it through this lens of a goal from this committee, which is making sure that we're picking carpets, we have a vision for transparency or curriculum alignment, right? If we do want students to spill out into that corridor, when we replace lockers, that would be the time to take a look at what that wall looks like, right? So let's be sure we're setting that expectation as a district as we go forward, okay? I think the assumption is we leap to just building new buildings. It may not be that. It likely is not that across the district. So how are we investing in the buildings we have to still achieve these goals? We then, as I noted, broke this down into elementary and middle school. Like I said, really a lot of dialogue about what's the right quantity of elementaries and how big are they, and then really what does middle school structure look like as a district. So at the elementary level, three recommendations here. Consider closing, idling, repurposing, or selling multiple elementary school buildings to maximize operational and educational efficiencies within the remaining 4 K-4 kindergarten through 4th grade school buildings. Okay, so words chosen wisely there. Okay, so this committee really saying, I think that running 4 elementary schools, kindergarten through 4th grade, kindergarten through 4th grade would be the right quantity of schools at the right size. What the district chooses to do should be to consider how we repurpose those remaining buildings. Okay, leaving that open to further discussion and consideration. Okay, again, closing, idling, repurposing, selling, really important as keeping that wide open for the district to really assess what is the right long-term solution for that building and site if not being taught out of in this model. The next one is consider the consolidation of students and staff in ideal grade configurations within those remaining 4 school buildings with balanced student enrollment totals. And then lastly, consider maintaining a dedicated educational center for the district's earliest learners, K-4. Okay, in particular, I know a lot of dialogue in district here around K-4, a lot of dialogue statewide around K-4 and what that means. Okay, and then at the middle school level, the 2 recommendations are to consider creating a rolling cohort middle school path. That just means we don't have equal schools anymore, meaning we roll through middle school, right? 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th, and 8th. So consider creating a rolling cohort middle school path for all students by creating 1 intermediate school serving 5th through 6th grade students and one middle school serving 7th through 8th grade students. Okay. And then the second point is consider utilization of the 2 existing middle school buildings in the short term with the recommendation to study optimal long-term architectural solutions for this age level. Okay, and this is what I was kind of leaning into earlier, which was we have an obvious path on day one to set this in motion without needing to like build a new building or make a significant, right? There's a path to potentially making this grade configuration work as soon as the district's comfortable and ready to do so. Yet, some really, really good dialogue around, is that ideal? Maybe or maybe not. They're asking the board to consider continuing to study that in the long term.
Do we know anything about the numbers on that? Like
one
fifth and
one middle
sixth?
school, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Quantity of students?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be basically Lincoln, right? Yep. So,
1,300.
yep. And I know, when we think about middle schools, I think important, different from elementary. Elementary students enter in the same door, more or less, and move around the same hallways, more or less. Middle school is a different animal, right? 8th graders have a different bell schedule than 5th and 6th graders do. It's very common to have separate lunch periods in one another. Specials are dealt with differently, right, as you move through those ages. So I have been fortunate to design a number of 5th through 8th grade schools, right, middle schools. Almost always, they're set up with wings, and you break down those into smaller communities, not just grade level, but house level communities. So middle school, different from almost, any other school type, a lot of ability to take a large school and functionally make it operate as smaller communities. So less concern from me as we start to look at larger numbers under one roof at that level. It's not to say it's still not a lot of students, it is, right, in one building. But I think there are strategies that successfully we see in the state right now.
In the elementary school section, getting my eyes here, it says, consider the benefits of a dedicated educational center for district's early learning center. Is that early learning center part of the 4? Is that an additional building, or is that to be inclusive in that 4 elementaries?
Yeah, so that comes out of the assuming the admin team brings forth a recommendation. I think the goal there was to have that discussed as what is ideal for delivering K through 4th grade curriculum. Is that half day or is that full day? Makes a big difference, right? Just from a capacity standpoint, how many students we're fitting.
So one building would be early learning and K4.
Yeah, so I think to answer that question, it's dependent on what the district strategy is for delivering 4K. Okay, so itemize that here because the group saw a lot of benefit in focusing on that. Also as a strategy to, bring in students early, get them into the system, build relationships with them, get support around them, and maintain them as a consideration for increasing enrollment. That's a very common strategy being discussed right now. What that looks like relative to, can it fit in one building? Which building would it fit in? That I think is dependent on.
So it is inclusive in that, okay.
Yep. Certainly, Lee, feel free to.
Yep, you're right on.
It's an additional 4, right?
So that
Yes, it is,
puts
Karen.
Yeah.
that's another
So
transition,
it's Riverview, right?
possibly.
If you choose to be in the 4K model, yeah, I mean, that's always the variable. Correct. Here is that still an option for families, and so,
Sure.
yep.
I think, what I'm hearing in the community is, ideas for elementary and middle. Where's the high school? Like that, it feels like it dropped off of discussion, and I don't think it did, but when you see a piece of paper like this,
Yep.
can you respond to that?
Yeah, so right out of the gates, the conversations were starting with grade configuration, because we only have one high school, and right now it's serving the quantity of students we have in that building, right? So the discussion would be, are we comfortable moving 8th grade to that high school, or 7th and 8th grade to that? So it's more of a grade configuration discussion to start than a capacity discussion, right? The goal right now is we have more square footage than we need, so if that's the case, my response would be, oh, we gotta move more students to our one high school we have, which is more of an educational delivery discussion than it is a ideal capacity. It'd be different if we had 2 high schools, right? Or one we were busting at the seams of or something, right? That's a very different conversation. So it's not to say that, you know, we did dialogue about that or that that shouldn't be a part of the solution. I think, again, tried really hard not to talk architecture, right? Tried really hard when the group brought it up to facilitate good discussion, document it, but not like drive towards what the architectural solution was. But there was a lot of dialogue about the high school and what does that look like and what does it look like long-term. I think as a part of the recommendation you see here at the bottom, like continue a study of what the right long-term solution is for middle school. To me, all considerations should be on the table, including like, is the high school serving the high school appropriately? And is that not maybe a part of the discussion as a whole?
And then what about some of our innovative school pieces? Was that
Yep.
discussion?
Yeah, so again, the goal in working with the greatest quantity of students was to work with kind of our core kindergarten through 8th grade, to be sure, again, we're looking at the mass square footage. We did take into consideration as we looked at quantity of spaces and buildings, making sure we maintained space for special ed and for music and art. Again, we had said one of our biggest strengths was music and art, and so we had to be sure we're not losing or crunching that space. So we did acknowledge that as a part of making sure whatever this smaller version of who we are still maintains space for that. But again, what that looks like from a special ed standpoint, I would say contemporary special ed spaces, contemporary practices around how we're supporting that population probably look different from how we have the space to support that today, and should be a part of whatever the solution looks like in each individual building. I would say the outcome in my experience out of something like this would be to then acknowledge, okay, you know, not to jump ahead, but if the study were to continue, which of the buildings are we holding on to? How do those buildings serve the curriculum delivery, not just quantity of students, but the populations we're serving? Some of those buildings are older, some are younger, they have different dollar amounts associated with maintaining. All those things need to be taken into account. Again, trying really hard with a lot of really dedicated folks in the community to facilitate a lot of good conversation to get to the point to set us up for helping answer that level of detail, I think, in our next steps.
Any other questions? You've done all the shovel work. I mean, I really appreciate,
I just want
you
to,
know, we're getting to this point, yeah.
and I just want to reiterate, I know we said it was hard work at the outset, but now you really see that it indeed was. And the level of depth that we went into in terms of the learning and the exercises that Mike created to get us to where these are. I do want to go back to, and I do like, the goal of our thriving district for both of these groups was to have really great facilities. And so there's a reason that this is still called a facility advisory committee. I know this isn't coming with a referendum attached, but quite frankly, we have to solve for X before we solve for Y. And this means putting our district in a position to sustain itself. And I think we have to go back and talk about the reasons why. And I know it automatically comes to people's minds as we're declining in enrollment. But as Mike talked about, the driving force behind that decline is dollars and cents. And we know that we have three things in this district for resources: people, money, and time. And it's our job to make sure we maximize and optimize people, money, and time into student learning and achievement and their experiences here. And in order for us to maintain the high level of opportunities and programs that we offer kids at every one of our levels in this very comprehensive district, we have to look ahead. And in order to do that, we have to right-size ourselves so that we can maintain those programs for our kids and high-quality staff. And, I mean, these are the reasons we're here. And those things get lost in this conversation. They're the output of why we have to do hard things. And, you know, and I've heard people say, well, we should have done this. Like, let's leave all that aside and let's just say we looked at this together. And this is the thing, we're united as ships. We looked at it together. We involved our community. We involved our stakeholders in this district. And you know, from someone who really, I mean, I took a backseat in most of this. I observed and I was there to answer questions. But from a process standpoint, I am very, very proud of what these groups did. I bring these, I'm kind of like walking into my team, right? And going, well, this is what they're thinking. And, you know, the team of experts say, this is really good stuff. And so, you know, like all along the way, they did their homework, they worked hard. They were the other thing too, is we're talking about these backgrounds that you see up on this board. The high level of respect and listening and, you know, seeking to understand that they distributed or displayed during this was just incredible. So again, I thank Mike, all the team members to bring us where we are today. Because it truly was very impressive as a bystander.
I'll echo those thanks. I'll give a lot of the thanks to the people who served on the committee, because
Yeah.
you must have went through something with him leading you. Went through a lot of steps, and believe me, we appreciate that. That was one of the concerns of the board during this process, that it couldn't just be making decisions at this level and forgetting the community. So you guys stepped forward to help us make those decisions. One thing we have to understand is that we are one of, it's 7, 8, or 9 counties in the state of Wisconsin that has lost population since 1970. And I don't know why that is, but our population is down and everybody else is growing. So as a district, we have to provide the best we can to get the children that are here, the students that are here, interested in the Manitowoc Public Schools. And I think some of the things we talked about tonight in be them new buildings or renovation to old buildings and getting right-sized and doing things are processes that can help us become that district that people choose to come to again. Hoping it's 4K, maybe it's 3K. Who knows? And we might have room to start something like that. But those kind of things are the innovative things that I hope the board will look at. But the thank you has to go to the people who step forward. I mean, you guys gave up your time to help out and do this, and I truly, truly appreciate that. Keith?
Yeah, just to reiterate that, I am completely blown away by the work that you people have done. This is outstanding information, more than I ever expected, and I think the board, this is something that we have asked for 2 administrations, and we finally have it from the community. This is what we've looked for. So thank you all for a tremendous amount of work and this outstanding bit of information. So with that being said, I make a motion to direct the superintendent and administrative team of the Manitowoc Public School District to take the recommendations brought forth by our staff and Community Facility Advisory Committee and develop detailed plans and recommendations to be presented to the Board of Education at a special board meeting on Tuesday, November 25th, 2025. You want me to read it again?
Do I have a second?
Would you like me to read the? Okay.
Second.
Do you have it memorized?
Enlarged fonts.
I like it, let's go for it. Chris, you have a statement, or do you want to wait till this is voted on?
Well, I have one about this too now, so now I've got 2, so.
Okay.
When you're ready to start discussion on this, I'll weigh in.
So is there any discussion on the administration coming up with a plan?
Is there a second?
We had a second, didn't we? And
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Discussion.
I think that's exactly what we expect them to do. However, I'm a little concerned here about the timeline when the board hasn't had time to process this and then come back and say our whatabouts. It is absolutely, I want you to understand, this is in complete deference to you. We need to look it over, we need to think it over, and then we need to say what about. For example, as everybody who's been listening to me for 2 years knows, I would love us to start our preschool stuff at age 3. What would that look like? If we say we want to know how that's going to look, we need to have those so we need to have those discussions as a board, I think, before we ask that they start because I don't want them to build one thing for us, and then we go, well, what about this, what about this, what about
Is
this?
it-
So I just wanna make sure we don't have our district management team spinning wheels.
But we're taking a study and we're discussing it as a board with administration. So will we get that input that you're asking for
Through the
that step?
process,
Through
yeah,
the
that's
process,
what I'm asking.
And also in terms of timeline, I'll remind the group that our goal was to be done by the calendar year with
Yeah.
recommendations. We're clearly ahead of schedule, which means we have time. So in terms of us coming up with some recommendations that reinforce these.
Okay.
I think it can derive from that special meeting where there's conversations about what are we missing? What other things do we want to know more about? Because then there's also time from that meeting right before Thanksgiving until our next regularly scheduled board meeting, which I think is December 9th. So that would give opportunities for those types of things to be investigated, created, and data brought back for the board at that time. So I think we're pretty good on time for that dialogue.
I think the timeline that stated draws us to some kind of conclusion that we have to have these kind of discussions. And we just can't keep belaboring the point. We have to have a definitive timeline to really discuss these options to get a final recommendation. So that's all that timeline is on there for.
And
Just want to make sure we also capture public input before, so it sounds like the timeline will still accommodate that.
Correct.
Because we'll have the public input session.
And if we need to move that timeline, we can move that timeline. It's just, right now it's a parameter.
in my head, and I might be wrong, it's getting this started and getting the process. We haven't outlined what they came up with, some very good recommendations. We may have that discussion and not agree with some things, but at least now we're talking about it and there's a plan rather than just where we were. So,
If I can share just on public input, because I know that that's definitely something, these folks spent time and effort studying and coming up with these recommendations. Now it's our time to share with our community and then allow for questions, comments, and concerns that they may have to be part of this process. And those are already built in. So on Tuesday, next week, Tuesday, here at 6 o'clock, we're holding a meeting for anyone who wants to come. We'll do an abridged version of this and then ask for questions, comments, and concerns. And then post that, it's out there. We have a regular board meeting in November, which allows for public comment. And then we also, we'll have opportunities the plan is already to schedule another public information once we come in with the detailed recommendations, because people will likely have feedback and questions about that too. So there's going to be a ton of dialogue that will continue to happen in the community.
any other discussion on the motion to get this process officially started?
Yeah, read the motion again.
Carrie, I knew you were gonna, here we go. I move to direct the superintendent and the administrative team of the Mantua Public School District to take the recommendations brought forth by the staff and the community facilities advisory committees and develop detailed plans or recommendations to be presented to the Board of Education at a special board meeting on Tuesday, November 25th, 2025.
Got it?
Because what else would you want to do 2 days before Thanksgiving?
All right, any other discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay.
I'm silence is assent. What the group decides, it's okay with me.
Okay, so is that an abstain or is that a okay?
That's silence. Silence is assent. That's an official. I'm just saying.
All right. Okay, yes, Chris.
Yes. Now, to what I wanted to say before somebody moved something. This is exactly what we needed. A year and a half ago, we knew, number one, we had to do triage because the buildings are bleeding, okay? So that's why we went out and got money to do triage, to try and save the buildings on an interim step. We also clearly foresaw then, first we need to figure out what we're gonna do at the grade schools, then the junior highs, then the high school. So this really gets us, I'm super pleased that we're 2 steps down the line with the grade schools and the junior highs. So that's just great. That really was what we were looking to have so that we could get moving in the next year.
Thank you. Anybody else?
One more thank you to everybody sitting in the audience and those watching. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Nice job, you guys.
Well, if I look at the agenda, there is nothing else. I have a motion to adjourn.
Just before we do that, Biff.
Yes?
You were rattling off some dates at the beginning. I think one of them might have been wrong.
Yeah.
So just for the record, can we clarify?
Hang on.
I have them.
It was like a date.
I have
and
them
a
here.
date.
I think November might have been the
It's
wrong.
November 11th. The regular board meeting is
It's
November 11th.
Yes, I'm sorry. Got a little dyslexia there. All right, so November 11th is public input they can do.
That's up to the chairs. I don't have anything to do with that. That's why I'm
Are
not.
we having our routine committee meetings on the 4th?
Yep,
Yes.
Sure.
Committee meetings? Okay.
at their normal time.
That's just,
Facilities will be at 5 o'clock.
Anything else? Is there a motion to adjourn? So moved. Mr. Bowman, a second.
Let it die for want of a second.
Second by Mr. Shaw. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Thank you for your service. We are. Thanks, guys.